Hello, everybody. So I'm here to talk about A Gentleman in Moscow, our book for this month. And spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about the book through the end and some of the essential themes. So if you haven't quite finished, you may want to wait, and you could always let me know and we could show it again, in a week or so if folks aren't quite done. Because it is really a lovely book. I don't really want to spoil it for anybody, but so anyway, just let me know if we need to show it again. So where we left off, Count Rostov is living in the Metropole Hotel, and one of the main probably turning points of the book is when he gets very disheartened and decides he doesn't really have any purpose left, and he's decided that he's going to commit suicide by jumping off the roof of the hotel. And on the way to do that, he bumps into Abram, the hotel handyman, who happens to be an amateur beekeeper. And they get to talking, and Abram shares with him some of his honey, which has a very distinctive apple taste. And it reminds the Count of his childhood and gives him a little bit of optimism, and he decides that he's going to keep going and make the best of his situation. Another major point in the book is in 1938, Nina, who's now a young woman, she was the very charming girl that he met when she was young, who had the pass key to the hotel, which she leaves to him when she leaves the hotel. She returns with her 5-year-old daughter, Sophia. Her husband has been sent to exile in Siberia, and she's decided to go look for him. So she's asked the Count to watch her daughter, which initially she hopes will just be for several months, but in fact, Nina disappears, and he's never able to find out what happened to her. He never hears from her again. So he ends up looking after Sophia and basically being Sophia's father for the rest of her life. So at about the same point, Mishka, the Count's friend, who is the poet, is also exiled to Siberia for speaking out against censorship. He was working on some of Chekhov's letters, and there was a passage where Chekhov praises the quality of German bread, and one of the Russian censors decided that was not appropriate, that was too un-Russian, and they ask him to censor it, and he refuses and sort of has a tirade where he says way too much about censorship and ends up being exiled. And again, this is the friend whose poetry was very important and, in fact, comes into play at the end of the book as well. Let's see. Okay, and then we can sort of move to 1950, when, by this point, Sophia is a young woman. She's a very talented pianist. And in fact, the conductor of the hotel band has been giving her lessons, Victor Stepanovich. And the Count begins to worry as to what sort of future she'll have under the very oppressive communist regime in Russia. And about this point, Katerina, who is Mishka, the poet's lover, she comes to visit the Count and tells him that, in fact, Mishka has died in Siberia. And she gives the Count Mishka's final works, which were a compilation of quotes of famous works of literature that all have to do with bread, ending with the passage that he was asked to censor from Chekhov's letters. And at this point, we find out that, in fact, the poem that the Count was given credit for was actually written by Mishka. So the two of them published the poem in 1913 using the Count's name so that Mishka wouldn't be killed over it. Because they knew that if the Count got in trouble for it at that point in time, he would only be imprisoned. So looking back, that sort of led to the Count's being saved. Because if he hadn't been given credit, if he hadn't taken credit for the poem, then he probably would have been killed in 1922. It was only the fact that the Bolsheviks thought the poem had revolutionary leanings, which is what led to the Count's life being saved. So in fact, what the two friends did, trying to save the poet's life originally, which they did, also led to the Count's life being saved later on. But then that same poem couldn't be used in Mishka's defense later when he gets into trouble. So it's one of those things where you have a good reason for an action at the time, and years later it may come back to have some sort of unintended consequence that you couldn't possibly have foreseen. So another, back in the hotel, another important character that comes into play is a gentleman called, well, he's not really a gentleman, a man called the Bishop, which is someone who, he's a Bolshevik. He comes to work in the hotel, and by virtue of being a Bolshevik, he is able to rise quite quickly in management of the hotel. And this, the Count finds very frustrating, because the man has sort of no knowledge of hotel management, no appreciation for customer service, no knowledge of wine, no interest in anything like that. And a lot of those things were very important to the Count, so he really just can't stand this guy. And in fact, the Bishop goes so far as to lodge a complaint saying that the hotel wine collection is sort of too elitist. And he actually succeeds in having all the labels of all the wine of this beautiful wine collection removed. An incident that the Count takes personal offense to, as he always took great appreciation in the fact that he could pair the perfect wine with the perfect meal. And just from having friends who have wine collections, which I'm not lucky enough myself to have one, but the idea of a lovely wine cellar with all the labels torn off would, for a wine lover, I think is one of their personal nightmares. So at the point that the Count has learned of Mishka's death, he has his same group of friends in the hotel that he had before, but he also has the Bishop who's there who can't stand him. So at the point that the Count has heard of Mishka's death, he's decided that he really needs to take some sort of action to get he and Sophia out of Russia. And he sees an opportunity when Sophia is invited to tour Paris with the Music Conservatory in 1953. And he decides that that will provide the perfect opening for her to defect at that point, which in fact was how many great musicians and artists, Rudolf Nureyev, Mikhail Baryshnikov, lots of dancers, ice skaters, lots of famous Russians would take the opportunity of traveling overseas to defect. So he comes up with quite an elaborate plan for them to defect, and he steals various items from different guests at the hotel and has this very elaborate plan worked out. So he's got the plan in motion. Sophia is in Paris, and then the bishop stumbles upon, the bishop is now the manager of the hotel, and so he's in the count's room and stumbles across one of the pieces of their plan and goes to notify the authorities. And the count is able to get to him before he can get to the phone. He holds the bishop at gunpoint and then locks him in one of the storerooms. And he's using some pistols that he found years earlier in a wall panel in the manager's office during one of his travels around the hotel with Nina, when they would sort of play their game and roam about the hotel. And he locks the bishop in one of the storerooms, again, using the pass key that he got from Nina. So in a nice turn of events, the young Nina sort of comes back into the story and is able to be instrumental in saving her daughter, Sophia, years later. So I thought that was a very nice turn of events that brought Nina back into the story in a really nice way. So after performing in Paris, Sophia is able to disguise herself and slip away to the American embassy and to meet up with a friend of the Count's, a gentleman named Richard Vanderweil. And she also carries with her an accounting of a dinner that the Count attended that was the Russian Council of Ministers, that gives the Americans some idea of the different alliances that are shifting within the Russian group. And then it's in a sort of another turn, another part of the plan that I found particularly amusing. To help the Count escape the hotel, Richard Vanderweil calls all 30 of the phones at the Metropole Hotel, and that's a signal to the Count that Sophia has made it to his embassy. And it's also, in all the ensuing pandemonium of everyone trying to answer all the hotel phones, the Count is able to slip away in disguise from the hotel. And for anyone who ever worked as a concierge or worked as a receptionist, I can tell you there is a particular fear of having every phone line light up at once. So the idea of all 30 phones going at once would definitely create a good diversion. So the Count slips away from the hotel. He meets up with Stepanovich, who was the conductor who originally taught Sophia piano. And he takes the disguises and heads to Helsinki as a decoy, because people will think that that's the Count and that that's the direction he's headed. And rather than do that, the Count heads off and returns to his home province. And there he meets up with Anna Urbanova, which is the lovely actress who we met earlier in the book, the one with the dogs that ran amok in the sort of main room of the hotel. And she's waiting for him in a small tavern in his home province. So a really nice ending to the book, sort of, I think a much happier ending than probably what happened to probably 98% of the elites that were in Russia. But it's nice to think that some people did manage to have a happy ending. And a couple of themes that occurred to me throughout the book. One is the importance of home and how it's that sense of home and memory of a happy childhood that keeps the Count from committing suicide. And also, even before that, it helps him get through some of the hard times when has the portrait of his sister, which is very important to him, and some of the keepsakes that remind him of his sister, the little sewing scissors that look like a crane that were hers, that just help him keep memories alive of people that he loved that aren't with him anymore. And another piece that I thought was really interesting about home that I think I'll probably try to keep in mind next time I stop in my hometown, because whenever I do stop in the town where I grew up and left when I was a teenager, it usually makes me more sad than happy. So I thought next time I might try his approach. At the end of the book, they describe the Count looking on the burnt shell of his former estate. And he's described as wearing a wistful and serene smile. And the quote that follows is, "For as it turns out, one can revisit the past quite pleasantly, as long as one does so, expecting nearly every aspect of it to have changed." So I thought I may give that a go next time. We'll see see if I can make it work. And the other thing that occurred to me that I sort of mentioned as we were going was that law of unintended consequences. So where, Nina has the pass key to the hotel, which she passes to the Count, which he uses to save Nina's daughter all those years later. And just that, just that you can't always tell how things will turn out, and just sort of when it goes well, it's great. And that I thought was a nice touch. Sometimes those constructs in a book can seem too far-fetched, but this one I thought was just about right, where it seemed just about right to me, and not too far-fetched, that someone in the Count's position would have certainly held on to the key and seen the beauty of being able to sneak about, particularly when he was under house arrest and was supposed to be being watched at all times. And the other thing that I thought was nice was the mention of the movie Casablanca, where the Count asks his friend Victor Stepanovich if he's seen it, and the friend says, "No, I haven't seen it." And he says, "Oh, well, you should try to see it. I think you would enjoy it." So years later, the friend does manage to see the film, and he's particularly enjoys the scene where one of the patrons in the bar has been arrested, and there's been a whole scene in the bar, and tables got jostled around, and Rick, the owner of the bar, reassures his patrons that everything is fine, and he has the band start playing again, and he goes to a table and he turns upright a cocktail glass that had been knocked over and the ensuing rushing around. And the friend notes, in setting upright the cocktail glass in the aftermath of the commotion, didn't Rick also exhibit an essential faith that by the smallest of one's actions, one can restore some sense of order to the world? So there's also the idea that sometimes, of course, in Casablanca, Rick is the hero and he does a lot more than just that, but sometimes a small action can have a big effect in terms of reassuring people or trying to reframe a situation or set things on the right path. And again, it made me think that sometimes that can be the sign of a hero or a heroine, whether they do great things or whether they do small things. That sometimes trying to be the one to keep control of a situation and maintain order can do a lot. It can do more than you might think. Because that's a lot of what I remember from Casablanca was Rick's place. He was in charge of his place, even though it was this quite small section. And just that sometimes that can be the hallmark or the hint of the hero, or the hero that's yet to be, but that's the hint of who he or she might be. So I really enjoyed the book a lot. I hope most of you did. What we're going to be doing for our next book is we're going to be reading Tana French's book, The Searcher. And this one is about a Chicago police officer who retires and moves to Ireland and then gets drafted to help someone look for a missing person. I'm going to try to think if I couldn't put together some sort of list of questions or list of favorite passages or favorite themes or something, and see if we can't try to make this a little bit interactive between everybody in the book club and me, and then presenting it to the group. But I'm still working on that. I'll see what I can come up with. But if anyone has a suggestion, please feel free to give me a call or drop me a note or anything like that. I'm definitely open to suggestions. And for anybody who would like to join the book club, you can call Vibrant Living at 301-637-6849 and just let us know you'd like to join the book club. What we're doing right now is we are purchasing the books. So give us your name and we'll purchase a book for you and you'll be all good to go. Tentatively, we'll be discussing our next book, The Searcher, on February 25th. That gives us about 5 weeks to read the book. So I think that should be good. And for those of you that are already in the book club, the new books will be out at the concierge desk tomorrow afternoon. So that will be Thursday afternoon. And I hope you enjoyed it. And again, if anybody has any suggestions or thoughts, please feel free to reach out to me. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.